Hi there. This is Cindy Liu with CHRO Partners. I'm the founder of CHRO Mastermind. And I am thrilled today to have Bryan Franklin join us. Bryan is an amazing business strategist who has helped 9 CEOs go from startup to $1 billion in revenue. And you're probably like, why are you having him come and talk to us? Because I think every CHRO and chief people officer should learn how to do what Bryan knows how to do. Anyway, so we're going to get some tips from him today. And then we've got some questions that were also submitted from our community that I'd like to ask you as well. All right, Bryan. So first of all, I don't know if I did justice to your background, but tell us a little bit about, I guess, I don't know. I get calls from coaches all the time saying, can I get on your program? Can I come speak to your people? Can I do a vlog? I guess, why should they listen to you?
It's a great question, Cindy. First of all, thank you for having me and for suggesting we do this. As I mentioned, when we were chatting about it, I really, I should say, have a soft spot for CHROs, but I really love the potential of what's possible when you have a strategic leader with C-level authority whose mission is to understand the human element. The larger the organization, the more that the people and the leadership determine everything about what's possible.
Mm-hmm.
That famous quote, culture eats strategy for breakfast, et cetera, et cetera.
Right,
So
right.
I really believe in the potential, and I believe that as a whole, HR professionals have a lot to do, have a lot to grow. I think there's a lot of headroom about what could be done there. So why would listen to me? You ask me a question. I've been a coach, executive coach for 23 years now. I've done over 30,000 coaching sessions. And my clients on average stay with me for over 5 years. That's an average. I have 2 clients that have been coaching with me since 2003. And the reason they stay so long is because I continue to grow with them. I continue to give them insights, and the kinds of insights and coaching that I can offer run the gamut. It's not just here's your business strategy, or here's your people strategy, or here's your culture strategy, but also what's in it for them. Why are they doing this? Why are they even wanting to achieve this thing in the first place? So my clients are on a continual journey of refining who they are, what they're doing, why they're doing, and how they can make the biggest impact and be of greatest service, in their work. So I think that experience gives me a kind of unique perspective. Particularly, I think you said, one of the skills that really every executive needs is developing your people. And I think of all the skills that executives are supposed to have, that's the one that gets the least education, the least, talked about. It's so vital, but very few people are talking about exactly how to do that or training these executives on how to do it.
Yeah, yeah. I think after 8 years of running CHRO mastermind groups, I've seen really kind of the ability to influence at C-suite is so critical. And I've sort of boiled it down to, and there's more than this, but top ones for me is that they're consultative, right? They're trusted advisor. Number two, they've got a network of people they can reach out to so they can make confident decisions. But also, I think this strategic coaching skill, not just coaching, not just like the kind of coaching that's like, let me ask you a bunch of questions and you know the answer, right? You
Mm-hmm.
already know the answer.
Mm-hmm.
That to me, that's mindset coaching.
Mm-hmm.
I'm talking about business coaching, right? And that's what most CEOs need from their CHRO. So um, I guess share with me your thoughts on that.
Yeah, my one of my clients recently said, because I asked him, you've been with me for, I think it was like 8 years or something like that. And you've had a bunch of coaches before me. What is it about our work that you appreciate so much? And he said, well, you're an opinionated coach. So I was
Your
like,
first child,
I,
Bryan.
I was reflecting, like, how cool is it that I get to be paid to be opinionated? A quality I have it anyway. Now I get to utilize it. But
Yeah.
joking aside, I think to help someone else actually succeed, to really develop someone in their leadership or in their capability, or to help a CEO, achieve what they want to achieve. I think you need three domains. You need to be good
Mhm.
at three different things. You need to understand, business acumen. You have to have business mastery, enough
Mhm.
business mastery to understand the mechanics that are going to drive success and failure, and which ones are relevant and which ones are not. You need to understand like an interpersonal mastery. How does influence and leadership actually work, so that when the CEO tells you that they're going to do an all hands and they're reviewing their agenda of what they're going to talk about, you can accurately predict exactly how people will really respond.
Mhm.
Because if you accurately predict how people are going to respond and then they respond that exact way, the next time you make a prediction, CEOs can be listening, right?
Mhm. Mhm.
So how do interpersonal influence and leadership and dynamics actually work? There's also, this is an area, this middle one, where there's a lot of misunderstandings out there, like where instead of understanding how people really interact, we overlay this general moral sense of good behavior.
Mm.
And so we're like trying to enforce a moral sense of good behavior, even though that doesn't quite track to what really inspires, you know, and often there's an overlap, but not always. So if you don't understand that difference, then someone who cares about the outcome and doesn't care about moralistic good behavior is going to stop listening when you reach that divide. So if you want to keep influencing them, you have to understand what they're really after and
Mhm.
what influences people, good
Yeah,
or bad.
we're going to come back to that in a minute.
And
You
then,
know,
well, I was going to say this so quick. The last one is that you have to understand why people change and why they don't.
Mhm.
And that one, I think, is the one that is least understood. So many times people say, I work with CHROs and they say that they want to create some kind of change in the culture or change in an individual executive's behavior. And then they
Mhm.
suggest what they're going to do. And I say, I get why you're doing that, but I don't think it's actually going to cause the outcome. And then they try it, and sure enough, it doesn't cause the outcome. And then they get frustrated, and the cycle continues. But if you understand what actually causes people to change, then the kinds of interventions you suggest will always be effective.
Yeah, that's interesting. I want to come back and ask you something about that in a minute.
Yeah,
But I want to go back to number one, the business mastery.
yeah,
So CHROs hear that all the time. In fact, they talk about how their teams need to be more strategic and
yeah.
on the business mastery point. And I heard you talk about how no one will beat you at the game of leverage points. And I think that CHROs have such a unique vantage point as far as what are the leverage points to help grow the business, because they have view of all the people issues. They've got external people issue views, and that tells you what's going on in the market, right? The non-linear trends that you talked about in the past. Um, what tell me a little bit about those leverage points. Maybe just
Yeah,
pontificate a little bit on that.
sure. Well, um, I mean, it all started as for me as a child
Mhm.
because I was very lazy. I still relate to myself that I work very hard, but I still somehow think I'm lazy because, man, it would take a bulldozer to get me to do something I didn't want to do when I was a kid, and I wouldn't do any chores. I was just you did not want to have me as your child, I don't think. I would like pick up one sock and I'm like, I cleaned my room,
Mhm.
so lazy. So, and then schoolwork, I just didn't want to do it. I didn't like, I hated it and all that stuff. I was in high school, I was a very bad student. Was took until college for me to actually start to study. And I was always looking for what's the least I could do. And I thought of it as a negative quality for years. I thought it was like a character flaw.
Mhm.
What's the least I could do? What's the least I could do? But I realize now I was practicing looking for leverage, because the least I could do is what's the least input that creates the most output? What's the 1 hour of studying that will give me a C on a test instead of, the 30 hours of studying that would give me an A? And in school, it's not a very good strategy because you end up with a C when you could have gotten an A for not that much hard work. But in business, it turns out that that's vital because there isn't enough time, there isn't enough resources to get an A in everything. We can't. No business can get an A in everything.
Right.
It's just too demanding. We have to use the Pareto principle, the 80-20, to focus on the smallest thing that's going to create the biggest outcome.
Mm-hmm.
So those leverage points for me, they started to emerge in people. Like there's one belief that if we could shift that one belief, all the others would cascade. It's the
Mm-hmm.
highest leverage belief for that person. And it's going to be different for everybody. That's going to change the most behavior. Or what's the behavioral change that I can ask of this executive that's the easiest for them to change, the smallest possible change, but that's going to change the perception of their performance by the greatest number of people, the greatest amount. What's that leverage point? Or in the system, what's the leverage point in the entire workflow system? We've got this conflict between product and engineering, and the two leaders are at each other's throats and nobody's trust each other. What's the one procedural or process change we could make in terms of the workflow of how they work together? Maybe it's changing the requirement handoff and when that happens, or changing the location of the meetings that they have so it's more on neutral ground. What's the tiniest change that we can make that's going to have the biggest impact on the outcome? And I'm constantly looking for those, searching for those, and studying those.
Yeah, I think that goes to your third point too, right? The keeping it simple. But let me just make sure I understand that first point. My ADHD is popping out here.
All good, all good.
So, so for example, in a startup, let's say you have to build a sales team.
Yeah.
Right. You've got the conversions coming in, you've got the leads, but your sales team is not closing. Instead of the HR team focused on the talent management stuff that comes later, succession planning, like there's a lot of sexy stuff that most of us would rather work on. But then to really focus in on the redheaded stepchild, which is talent acquisition, for example, right? How do we make sure that we have a pipeline of salespeople always coming in?
Yep.
How do we make sure that when somebody turns over, we've got somebody ready to step in? No quota is ever missed. And if you help the company exceed its revenue targets, oh my gosh, you got a lot of credits in the bank. And it's really not that hard, right? To fix the talent acquisition issue.
Yeah. So if you're in a startup and you need to build a sales team, one thing I already know about that situation is that you don't have the budget to hire the best sales leader you need, the best sales managers regionally, the best sales reps, the best, BDRs and SDRs that can do appointment setting, the best revenue operations team. You don't have the budget for it. So already you have to choose what is the one role that's going to make the rest of the roles easier.
Right.
And sometimes that's the leader, unless you get someone who, as a sales leader, comes in and starts to build a bunch of process and not roll up their sleeves and get in and talk to customers. Depends on the phase you're in. You said startup. So what is you? And you also mentioned talent acquisition. What's the lowest effort way to get the sales pipeline going, so that you're always got the people on deck when someone leaves or needs to be managed out for performance, that you can backfill with someone who's ready to
look for that leverage point.
Maybe for some, maybe it's a combination of getting the candidate pipeline and improving the onboarding. And those are the two highest leverage things you do, so that the amount of time it takes for a salesperson to become productive is less. You take the onboarding time from 3 months to 1 month for productivity of salespeople. That, again, you're going to have a lot of credits in the bank with the executive team.
Yeah. So sometimes even if you have lots of credits in the bank, it's hard to get your proposal pushed through.
Yeah.
I hear a lot of CHROs really struggle with that. Or maybe they know, like I hear them say, this is what the company should do, but they're not really speaking up. I don't know if it's like, I'm not worthy, or, what's the challenge there, but what are your thoughts on, I've heard you talk about different archetypes and how do you sell to the C-suite? I'm curious if you can give us a little bit of perspective on that at a high level.
Sure. Well, I've got a short answer and a long answer. And I'll do the short answer first, then we'll talk about the long answer. So the short answer is, if you're having trouble with your initiative and your CHRO getting it through, the first question I'd ask is, where are you coming from with that initiative? Because if, for example, you have a viewpoint on how things should be, and your proposal is to try and form the company into how you think it should be, irrespective of the collective and individual desires and mission and vision of the C-suite, then that proposal is probably not going to go anywhere. If you, however, deeply understand exactly how the executive team views the current situation as it is and what they view as where they want it to go, and you see insights about how to streamline the process of becoming the company that they want, not the company that you think it should be, but the one that they want, and your proposal is an accelerator to make that happen more quickly, and you can make an argument for why that's the case, that proposal is probably going to go through.
Okay.
So where you're coming from, on behalf of whom are you making this proposal? For example, it's probably not a proposal that's going to be listened to if the proposal is to treat employees better into a system that doesn't value the employees as, historically. But if you can show that valuing the employees is a way to reduce the cost of future performance, and you can actually draw correlation in the kinds of ways and using the kinds of data that the executive team already finds credible, now your proposal might get somewhere. If my agenda is try to get the employee treatment better, I might be blocked. My agenda is to try to make the company into the company they want, and I can show them that treating the employees better is the best way of getting there. And if you don't do that, you're actually be hampered in getting there. If I can make that argument, I'm more likely to get that through. So that's the short answer.
Yeah. I'm dying to dig into all the different archetypes, but I think with the time that we have today, maybe for our audience, if you're interested in hearing about these 5 different type of archetypes and how to really pitch to them or influence those types, just drop me a note or drop a comment in the chat, and we'll bring that to you later.
I just want to highlight what that is so people understand what they're going to request. I was asked to speak to a group of CHROs many years ago about how to get your proposals accepted by the C-suite. This is actually, I said CHROs. There was no such thing at the time. They were VPs back then.
Okay.
But it's a recent invention. But the idea was, how do you make a proposal that you'll know is going to get accepted? And it turns out that there are 5 different archetypes for how every single business decision maker makes decisions. And if you have a proposal that doesn't satisfy one of these 5, your proposal will be shot down. So it's a way of thinking through how 5 very different ways of viewing your proposal. And if all of them agree, it's going to go through. And we can go into more detail time.
Definitely. So I want to bring us back to, I guess, after coaching so many CEOs to $1 billion in revenue, that's amazing. Are there any recurring themes or behaviors that a CHRO should be fostering in their CEOs that you can point to?
Yeah, for sure. So I think for most CEOs, the biggest room for improvement is their ability to face reality and to have the company as a whole face that reality together. And so face reality could mean that you prioritize metrics in every communication that you have with people about what the objectives are, about what the priorities are. Metrics being measurements of things that are happening. So a goal is something that I imagine that could happen in the future, and a metric is measuring what's happening now, like a speedometer. I can say, I have a goal of driving 1,000 miles today, but I can declare that goal without having a car. I can just say that. It's completely fiction.
Mhm.
A metric is a speedometer that's telling me how fast are we traveling. And the how fast are we traveling somehow gets lost in the executive communication often. And people
Mm.
talk and work together in this fantasy world of the goal. You know, oh, what would it take to do that? And structure,
Mhm.
these concepts, but their feet kind of get lifted off the ground and they stop being connected to what's actually happening now and
Mhm.
what would be the most incremental improvement on what's currently happening. So that bringing in a conscious, constant awareness of what's actually occurring and what are our best leading indicators of success and what are they ticking off? Not what our goal, not what we'd like them to be, but what is happening
Mhm.
now. Such an incredibly valuable piece. So
Mhm.
that's an aspect of facing reality, both
Mhm.
individually and together. And if you have one foot firmly placed in what's happening now and the other
Mhm.
firmly placed in your vision, then you will be the bridge that the company travels across to become your vision of what's possible for it. Um, when that tension becomes too great, most CEOs let go of either their vision or of reality. And
Mm.
my observation is people are more likely to hold on to their vision. So the reality is often the one that gets
Mm.
that's
Oh,
left.
interesting. Yeah, last summer when we did our big HR event, our roundtable discussions were around CEOs who, even though they have the data, they still want to do what they want to do because they get
Yep.
maybe anecdotal data, like,
Yep.
oh, I know what that generation wants based on my granddaughter.
Right.
It's like, so ties
Yeah,
right back.
which can be okay
Mm-hmm.
if everyone accepts that that's what's happening. Like if we say, you know what, we understand the data, and sometimes you gotta make a creative call. You gotta forge the future, not from the past, but from nothing. And we're deciding to do that together right now, and we understand that risk. If that's happening as a team, I don't see necessarily a problem with it. You don't have to
Okay.
always be a slave to the data, but you
Right,
have to know what the data is saying. You have
right,
to
right.
understand it. One more face reality piece, because these are kind of things where I'll say that, and you'll say to yourself, "Oh, my company faces reality. We're good at that. Check the box. We have metrics. We have a dashboard."
Mm-hmm.
However, for example, when you have an executive team meeting, how certain are you that what's being spoken out loud at the meeting is the same talk track as what people are privately thinking about?
Mm.
If people have a different talk track in their mind about what they're thinking about what's happening than what's being spoken, if those diverge, then you are not facing reality as a group, because you have your own assessment up here of reality, and then you have this different version of what's being agreed to out here. And when that divergence in the gap between what people privately think and what they're willing to say, all the creativity, all the execution, all the growth and power in the company escapes out that gap.
How do you get them to come back together?
Well, you start
Or is
with
that a
yourself.
mm.
What are the things you privately say to yourself that you're not willing to say in an executive team setting? And then you go to the CEO and you ask them, what are the things they privately think that they're not willing to say? And
Mhm.
you work at A, improving the quality of the thoughts so that they actually could be said, and B, saying more of what seems scary to say until they meet.
Right. That's so good. That's really deep. Like makes my brain hurt a little bit thinking about how to get them there.
I remember I did an executive like a strategic offsite this many years ago, and we did this all like 4 days of all the things you do, all the processes. Many sticky notes died in the making of the of the vision, and we finally got to this list of commitments and quarterly goals and all this stuff.
Mhm.
And they were read out at the end, and I looked at around the room, and I could just feel that almost no one in the room believed they were going to happen.
Mm.
There was like, kind of directionally okay, but like
Mhm.
actually. And so I stopped. I said, all right, who would, stake the life of your families on that this is for sure going to happen?
Mm.
Nobody raised their hand. I'm like, well, maybe that's too much. Who would be more surprised if this didn't happen than you would be if it did? And still no one raised their hand. And I said,
Mm.
okay, so that means we just wasted 4 days. Because what you really think is secretly going to happen, that's your actual vision for your department, for yourself, for the company. And if we can't come together as a team and talk about what we really think is going to happen, then
Mhm.
we're not working together.
Oh, that's so good. The undercurrents, right? Like
Totally.
you really have to get at what people actually feel. And I think that's, having a safe culture, safe environment where people really feel comfortable saying, here, this is what I really think of this. So critical. I can tell you at a company I ran years ago, my COO was sort of like our CHRO, and she just was the truth teller. Like she did not afraid to speak truth to power. And I can't say I was always the most approachable CEO, especially in my younger days. And she just was not afraid to be like, Cindy, that's not going to happen.
Mhm.
I'm like, well, why? And then she'd be like, and this and this and this and this. And I'm like, okay, all right, let me, let's regroup then. And
Yeah.
as a CEO, I so appreciated that she was not afraid to come and tell me this. Right. And, um, sometimes I know this, that CHROs, they see a lot of whether it's the leverage points or things that really should be happening in the organization strategically for the business to grow. And
Yeah.
they're just not necessarily speaking up. So I think that's
Well, so you just told a story, and to
Mhm.
me, the most important part of the story is the part you sort of uh, glossed over a little bit because you said why, she said this is not going to happen, and you said why, and then
Mhm.
she said this and this and this and this and this. My guess is that when she said whatever she said about the reasons, she
Mhm.
was absolutely speaking your language. She deeply understood your
Mhm.
objections and
Mhm.
objectives.
Yep.
She understood your values, your worldview, and she was able to speak the reasons in a way that made sense to you, that fit into how you already saw the world, versus arguments that require some kind of like a religious transformation or a conversion for
Yeah.
you to go from believing one thing to believing another thing, but
Right.
without the handholds of how to get there. And so, if you want to be the kind
Mhm.
of CHRO that she was for you, you have to understand how to speak the language.
Okay. So that just, wow, that just hit home because you know what? She started off in sales or recruiting and sales, right? Set recruiting and selling. And then went on the BD side. And so she was so good at doing that with clients. And so she just took those skills and brought those in house,
Yeah.
right? Like
Yeah.
that's exactly what she did. So that consultative skill set is critical, not just taking an order, but actually providing a solution, as well.
Yeah.
I love that. Earlier, you talked a little bit about shedding misconceptions, and a lot of CHROs who like came from the big companies that what we call academic uh, firms, right? The academy firms,
Yeah.
where many CHROs are produced. And then they go into these middle market or upper middle market companies, and then suddenly, like the C-suite has no idea how to leverage strategic HR, right? There's this misconception that HR is just about keeping, party planning, get us paid, make sure we don't get
Right.
sued.
Right. Avoid
And
lawsuits. That's a big one. Yeah.
yeah, but they're not really viewed as a strategic lever for growth. Tell me about shedding misconceptions and
Yeah.
you do.
Well, if we kind of grossly categorize, I know there's many types of HR leaders, but if we say there's two types of HR leaders, one, which is a little more rare,
Mhm.
that can see um, opportunities in the labor market, in the amongst the competitors, culturally, to create extraordinary results from ordinary people
Love it. Yeah.
because of how we work together, because of how we are together, because of how we treat each other, because of how we organize ourselves. And then when you uh, interact with the CEO's, audacious vision, you see how to leapfrog it because there's advantages out there that aren't being thought about and capitalized on. That's one. And the other type of HR leader is trailing the organization, sort of lodging complaints for why, all the ways that it isn't as friendly as they'd like it to be,
Mhm.
becoming almost like an advocate for the complaints of the either management or the complaints of the employees, being like an amplifier of when anyone has a problem, you make it louder until it gets
Mhm.
solved,
Mhm.
sort of a wheel squeakifier. And then also making sure that all the boxes are checked and that that nobody gets sued if possible, and benefits all are administered and paychecks go out. So that when that second type of HR leader goes to make a proposal, they just don't have the credibility to get it carried.
Mhm.
Whereas the management team will listen to almost anything the first type of HR leader says. So,
Right.
and if that's not an either or, but it's a continuum, and everybody that's listening is somewhere on that continuum,
Mhm.
question is, how do you move more towards that first type of HR leader? And it's by asking really hard questions, like, why do we do it this way? Or what is this actually designed to protect? Or this policy that I've believed in, um, have I ever seen it actually backfire? Have I seen someone do something else that was actually more effective at achieving the same outcome? What were the other factors that made that work? It's like continually challenging your own assumptions,
Mhm.
so that when you are having a dialogue with your leaders about why you think something should happen, every reason you give is well considered, and it's well considered from your point of view, from the employee's point of view, from the leader's point of view. You really understand all the pros and cons, and you can speak to them. um, like, one thing I see is pretty common as a misconception is that happy people perform better. It's radical for me to put a stake in that one, but
Mhm.
um, I think that that's a misconception. I don't think that if you make someone happier, they'll perform better at work.
Mhm.
I do
Mhm.
think that if you provide the environment that leads to success and high performance, a emergent property of that environment is that people will be happy. So there's correlation.
Mhm. Right.
But if you take a dysfunctional work environment and, you know, surgically implant happiness somehow, uh, in a really dysfunctional organization, one way you can make people happier is to reduce the level of accountability and responsibility everyone has.
That's so good. That's so good. Like, I can tell you, like, part of the reason I couldn't work for big companies is because the last one I worked for, it took like 19 logins to get a contract open. I was like, I can't do this.
Yeah, totally, totally. And
Like,
if
I
it's
want to
not,
get things
yeah,
done.
and making you happier isn't going to make you more effective. Fixing the login thing is going to make you more effective and happier. But so
Right.
you can't get to high performance through happiness, but directly. It's
Yeah.
Happiness is an emergent property of a well-organized system. And if we are working hard together,
Mhm.
people are going to have bad feelings sometimes. People are going to feel ashamed. They're going to break their promises. They're going to feel bad about that. They're going to try and fail. They're going to feel bad about that. That's going to happen in a high
Mhm.
performance organization. And so if what you're trying to do is inoculate the employees from any bad feelings, you will also inoculate yourself from a high performance organization.
Mm.
I think
Mhm.
instead we have to help people empathize with each other about those feelings, and you know make sure that we don't convert them into negative actions, make sure that we use them constructively, make sure that we don't convert them into low self-esteem, help people process, when I fail, what does it mean and what do I do about it? And when you have a way of effectively dealing with bad feelings instead of like trying to avoid them altogether, then as a culture, the bonds are way, way stronger, and the teamwork is way, way more potent.
I
So
just,
that's like one, I get a couple
right.
like
Yeah,
misconceptions.
no, that's so good. I'm tying this back to when I ran an organization that basically we did recruiting on an hourly basis. So we would outsource the recruiting function, like the tough roles.
Yeah.
And in our organization as a recruiter, you only had to handle 5 searches at a time, including, and you got research support and you got a lot of admin support. Um, And so a lot of these recruiters would be like, I'm going to go to corporate and go to the other side and, be the person being called on. I'm like, oh, you go. Well, they'd land and they'd have 40 recs on their
I was
desk.
going to say, yeah, it's a
Yeah.
big, going to be a big
So,
increase in the number of roles they're filling. Yeah.
and then they'd boomerang back. I'm like, why are you coming back? And they're like, because I feel like I'm not set up for success.
Hmm.
And we're like, we had to set them up for success because we had to deliver results for the client. So however we needed to design it to make sure that they could succeed. But the power of that, right, of making sure somebody feels like they can succeed is, yeah, that makes happier employees. All right,
It's
my last.
way, but yeah, it's way more potent than having policies that, like I've worked in companies that have had policies where peer-to-peer direct feedback was prohibited because uh, you you didn't want to make anyone feel bad. So if
Mm,
if you had feedback for someone, you anonymously submitted it to their boss, and their boss could deliver it. But in that, you lost all its meaning. And
mhm,
so,
mhm. Yeah, with
um,
trust. Like, why are you
exactly, like
helping? Yeah.
exactly, yeah.
Okay, my last question, and then we have a few from our community. I get the question a lot as when CHROs are in transition or thinking about transition. And they're like, what kind of company, how do I make sure I'm not in this kind of dysfunctional mess again, working for a CEO that just, like they have to be the buffer for the CEO. And I'm like, well, I mean, there's a lot of things, right? Like I see people who are not underwriting the company carefully. Like, what are the typical questions a PE firm would ask in order to invest in the company? Like how many, what percentage of clients are, you know, uh, you have all your clients or one client that's 50% of your
Right,
portfolio?
right.
And what
Risk,
are the typical,
concentration risk.
business questions you would ask to make sure that this is a company that has a unique value proposition that's going this direction.
Yep.
But then, my point of view, and I'm curious what you think, Bryan, is that um, they're also, some of them are so tired, right? They're like, "Oh, I'm so tired of educating the CEOs and C-suite teams on how they can leverage HR. Like I spend like 3 years just getting them to the point where we're doing anything that's really adding value to the organization because they think we are supposed to be just party planners and, you know, keeping the payroll going. And I'm like, well, you know what? If you only chose companies that had it all figured out, right? The C-suite had the contact of great HR and strategic HR, you would be eliminating, gosh, I don't know, 90% of the companies out there. Sad, but it's true.
Mhm.
So then my feedback is, or my advice is look for a CEO or C-suite team that's coachable, right? So even if they don't understand, they don't have the context, are they coachable? What's your perspective on my advice?
Yeah, so I'm going to challenge you on this one. It's very common advice, this idea of coachability. And I know a lot of coaches, I'm an executive coach. I know a lot of coaches who list as the very first attribute that they require from their clients is that they be coachable. I think there's a difference between coachability and coach ability, meaning there's a difference between how pliable is your CEO and how
Mhm.
skillful are you at delivering coaching that
Mm,
that CEO can actually follow.
right.
If you take a CEO that you think is absolutely not coachable, I promise you, I can form a relationship with them where I'll coach them and they'll take my coaching
Mm,
because the I will have understood them. If you have someone who's not coachable, it's it's probably because you don't understand how they operate, how they think about their values, how they prioritize. When you understand all of that, it's pretty easy to show them how a better way is better. If your way is in fact better and they're not seeing that,
mm,
then there is a way of showing them that through their lens, through their language, the way they see the world.
okay.
If your way is not better, then they're right to not listen.
I love that. That's such a different perspective. But yeah, I think like where I got that from was years ago when I was in executive search. We'd say, oh, I don't care how difficult the search is as long as the client's coachable. Well, we could walk from those clients. You don't get that choice as a CHRO, do you?
Exactly. It makes sense actually in recruiting. Like I would want, first of all, them to be coachable, not just so I can help them get placed, but I'd want them to be coachable because they're going to more likely to stay in the job, and like be pliable by the
Mhm.
new culture that they're in. And therefore, I don't have to replace them. So it makes sense from that point of view. But when you're a CHRO, you're in.
Yeah.
Also, I think you said something interesting earlier about this idea of like if you're not um, if you're only going to work for people who already value everything you do, that eliminates most companies. But I also think that's kind of a cop out, because it's like saying I have this skill, but I'm annoyed if I have to use it. I mean, your value is that you understand these things that other people don't understand.
Right.
That's what makes you valuable. That's what makes your salary high.
Right.
And
Right.
if everyone already knew everything you knew, and you didn't have to change anyone's mind, you would have no value to the organization. So I think that, my value as a coach is how difficult it is to get these ideas across to other people. If it wasn't difficult, why would you pay me? I would have no use, right? So
Right.
it's almost like I had a personal trainer talk to me about the pain associated, when you were lifting weights, the pain in your muscles. That pain is your strength. It's not your weakness that you're feeling. It's your strength. That's what strength feels like, because you are utilizing it.
Yeah.
And that's what it feels like. So I think the pain of trying to convince the organization to do the right thing is the intensity of your value that you're offering. And why not offer the value, where it's most needed?
That's so good. Okay, I lied. I have one more question.
Okay.
Um,
I'll forgive the lie.
yeah, so I think coaching up is important, but also I hear a lot of CHROs say to me, "Oh, I really need our HR business partner team to be more strategic. I really need our center of excellence leaders to be more strategic or act more like product managers." And and at the same time, I hear them basically talk about their day, which is packed full of C-suite meetings, right? Like they're the go-to. So lots of these CHROs have to be player coaches. They don't
Mhm.
get to just coach.
Yeah, of course.
And so how do they make them most of their time? How do they help their teams? Right. To me, they should be doing curbside chats. They should be, listening in on some of these interactions with the C-suite so they can bring their team up to a point where they can also interact with the C-suite. So the CHRO doesn't have to be in the middle of all those conversations. Do you have an opinion on that?
For sure. Yeah, I think for not just for CHROs, but for every executive, developing people is one of the most important things you can do.
Mhm, mhm,
And if you continually develop, uh, in 5 years, your team will be unrecognizable in terms of its capability, versus if you kind of have flat.
mhm,
So emphasizing development is not as efficient as emphasizing efficiency, output. If you emphasize
mhm.
output or work, you'll
Yeah.
get more out of your team than if you emphasize development. Because to emphasize development, you have to have people doing stuff they don't know how to do. You have to
Mhm.
spend extra time mentoring. It's not as efficient, maybe 60, 70, 80%
Yeah.
of its full efficiency. However, in 5 years, it's going to be 5, 6 times the capability. So, but to develop someone, we need a couple of components. We need we need to know what what they imagine is possible for them,
Mhm,
that
mhm.
they are interested in. Who are they becoming? And I would challenge you to eliminate the word strategic, because I think it's such a sloppy word that people use to mean all kinds of different things. Someone told me they wanted their HR professional to be more strategic. This was a business leader that had
Mhm,
an
mhm.
HR assigned to their team. They're like, I wish
Yeah.
they were more strategic. And when I drilled down to what it actually meant, it meant that they they wanted them to come to more meetings,
Right.
just to be around so that they could just say, hey, I need this, like an assistant.
Right.
The opposite of strategic. But the word strategic was used to describe this fuzzy
Yeah.
thing that when you nailed it down, it meant something totally different. So eliminate that word strategic and start talking about what actual capabilities they need to have. And a capability is defined by a decision you trust to make that in your absence.
Yeah.
So you can list, what are the decisions I want to trust them to make in my absence? And what are the decisions that the business leaders want to trust them to make in the business leader's absence? And that list becomes a set of skills that could be a development plan. Then you have to ask them, do they want to learn how to do that stuff?
Right. That's a great hack. I love that.
Yeah.
But on the development piece, I mean, a company that I worked for years ago, we were testament to that. So we were number one fastest growing company in Inc. magazine in year 2000. I'm really dating myself now.
Yeah,
Um,
that's the year I
but
started coaching, so I'm with you.
yeah, so the CEO, I guess I didn't realize what a gift this was, but the CEO truly believed that you couldn't be a player coach. He wanted all the general managers to be coaches.
Yeah.
And so he's like, you can't carry a book. And it's so counterintuitive because we were a startup, right? Like we had, some venture capital money to help us grow, but
I was going to
it
say
was
that sounds like venture capital money, the kind of position, but yes,
right, right. It was not friends and family for sure. But
it's not the scrappiest approach, but I
yeah,
could
but
see
I
how it
was
could
a
work. Yeah.
solopreneur. So I was like, what do you mean I shouldn't carry a bag? Like that was scary to me. But
Yeah.
what I saw was that I could take somebody from like no sales skills or, no knowledge in our industry of selling consultatively in 6 months to like somebody who's bringing in millions of dollars in revenue
Mhm.
because I got to go on calls with them, right? So I do think that that is so valuable. And, had I had actually any coaching skills at the time, it would have even been more helpful. So, okay.
Well, um, yeah, Alison Armstrong, who teaches like how to have healthy marriages and stuff like that, makes an observation that if uh, if 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 you could make someone better by telling them what they're doing wrong, then all the husbands would be a lot better. It does it doesn't tend to work. So how are you going to actually help them get better? It's not just by demonstrating it. It's not by just telling them what they're doing wrong. It's not by giving them praise and encouragement. Those things are all woefully insufficient to actually develop someone. So you have to understand what causes someone to develop, because oftentimes they want the thing, you want them to have the thing, they're committed to it, they've promised to do it, and they still don't make a change. They still don't actually develop the skill even though they have access to all the resources, the
Mm-hmm.
mentorship, they actually know what the steps are to do it,
Mm-hmm.
but they still don't do it. And if you can't get underneath that, then I don't think you can effectively develop people.
That's so good. Okay. All right. I'm going to go to some of our
Yeah,
community
let's do it.
questions now. This question is for this from a CHRO who's like, or not a CHRO yet, right? In title, probably more a VP, but is the head of HR.
Mhm.
And as the company's growing astronomically, and this person's helped them with board work and major transformations, bringing in new C-suite members. But the concern is long term, getting sort of typecast into that role versus getting promoted into the CHRO role. Because
Mhm.
often we see that companies grow so fast that instead of them going, oh, you're ready for that role, we're going to promote you for all the good work you've done, we're going to bring somebody in so we can leapfrog, right? Somebody who's already got the CHRO title.
Yeah.
What's your advice for this person?
Well, my first response is to take a hard look at why you want that. Because the more, I mean, because what's in the title? The title affects more than anything else how other people sort of what the opinion they might have of you. And the more you're committed to manage image, the more you're committed to manage how other people think of you, and the less that you're committed to actually make the changes in the organization, the less qualified you are for a C-level title. So it's a kind of a catch-22.
Mm,
The more you care about it, the less likely it's really yours to have. So that'd be the first, is like really take a hard look at, do I want this for me because it would feel good, because
mhm,
it fits my image of what I want, because it's my career path? Or do I want this because this is actually the best way for me to serve the company? That's
mhm,
the first thing. Like if someone gets hired in, are they hired in because they've done actually before a lot of things that you haven't done and can maybe avoid mistakes that you might make learning things for the first time? And therefore it's an opportunity for you to learn from them?
mm,
Or is hiring above you actually a mistake? And you have to take a hard look at that. Now,
right.
once you have, let's say you're still determined, the magic question is to the CEO, tell me about what a CHRO for the future means to you. What are the things that they would need to be able to demonstrate and do? What experience would you have of their work? And what are the gaps between that and what I'm currently doing from your perspective?
Yeah. Yeah. What are the gaps?
And you're going to want to be defensive. You're going to want to say, but I am doing that, but I did do that. You're going to want to make an argument. And you got to let all that down and really search for the ways that if they haven't promoted you, it's because you haven't earned it yet. And take that and redouble your commitment to be not just what you think is good at your job, but to be the kind of influence over the company that the CEO views that a future CHRO would have.
Right. Thank you. All right. The next question is, what advice do you have for CHRO of a new public company? They just went public.
Yeah. Well, so I'm assuming that they were the CHRO while it was private and now it's gone public. And so it's not a new company to them, but it's newly public.
Yeah.
And there's a lot that's different about public companies, including the emphasis on like being able to audit, and the stakes are higher, costs for mistakes are higher. But I think the most interesting change is that the going public represents a kind of a benchmark in a journey that a company goes through as it's growing. When a company starts out, the most important thing is what new thing can it invent? What can it create that is not predicted by the past, right? What is this brand new innovation, either in methodology or in product or in how we do it or who we are? And our ability to innovate and create new things that never existed before is the most important thing to our success. But for a mature company that's been public for a long time, the street values companies based on how well you can predict the future, not how much you disrupt it. So accurately predicting a modest growth year after year after year after year is going to produce a higher stock value than unpredictable, volatile, up and down, up and down, up and down, where sometimes things great happen, sometimes they don't. We can never tell when that's going to happen. That company is going to have a much lower stock value. So the whole company has to go through this shift from valuing innovation to valuing conservation, to valuing disruption, to valuing prediction. And that is a rough cultural transition, especially for something that started out in technology or where innovation was a big part of the cultural identity. And you have to somehow make that transition without squashing the soul of the company, without taking away its ability to continually move forward and break new ground year after year. So it's like a more measured, predictable breaking ground instead of a radical, volatile breaking ground. How do you make that transition? How do you install that difference? How do you recognize who you're hiring, who you're promoting, how you're recognizing people, how people interact, what are the meeting structures, who gets rewarded and what are the consequences? All that has to shift towards recognizing that prediction is an equally valuable skill as disruption. And it's one that we need to recognize and organize around more now.
Yeah. And the CHRO is in such a great position to drive that change.
For sure. Yeah.
Okay. Last question from our community is, when you're working with CEOs or presidents who, maybe you don't have a great relationship with them yet, right? You're maybe new to working with them. And how does one effectively provide feedback on blind spots that they have?
Yeah. So if you just start announcing someone's blind spots, first of all, if it's truly a blind spot, they can't see it. And when you point them out, they're still not going to see it. If it's a real blind spot, it takes many repetitious pointing outs of blind spots before someone goes, oh, I see what you're saying. Normally they'll see it, but they just don't get the weight of it. They don't get like They're like, oh yeah, but that's not a big deal. You're like, well, no, it really is a big deal. And then they just kind of think you're overreacting, except for the 30th time. They're like, oh wow, that's kind of a big deal. And you're like, I've been telling you. So it's a slow process usually, but what speeds it up is if you really understand what is it that that person wants that they're not getting.
Mm-hmm.
And if you can understand what they want that they're not getting, and then you can show them how recognizing and correcting this blind spot is going to help them get that thing, then they're going to be eager to get the feedback incorporated if it's in the context of something that they really want. Um, you know, I remember a time where there was a person who had been received a lot of feedback about, you know, you're not human, you're a robot, you don't care about people, you only care about the numbers, this kind of thing. And they were a leader, ruthless or whatever, had all these reputation. And in a way, he kind of was proud of it. He thought of it as like he's a shrewd business person that sacrifices everything for the company. You know, like it's some weird, like romanticized version of it. Um, and no, he wasn't listening to the feedback. But I started coaching him, and I started talking about how hard it was for him to get certain things done. You know, and I said, look, have you ever noticed that in marketing, they wanted to get this thing done. They brought it to the executive team. Everyone said yes, it was done. It was like 2 weeks later. Nobody had to talk about it anymore. Easy peasy. And then you had a similar scoped thing that you were asking for, and it's been 6 months, and still every time you bring it up, people yell at you. Well, there's a reason. There's a reason why it's harder for you to get things done than other people. And it's because you haven't invested in the relationships. Instead, you have this badge of honor around mistreating people. And then when you need something, that people use that as their opportunity to get back at you for not caring about them. And so the amount of evidence that or power or effort or energy that you need to get something over the line is like 10 times what other people do. So if you start investing in these relationships, it's things are going to get a lot easier around here for you. And he was like suspicious, but willing to give it a shot.
Okay.
And then a few months later, he's like, you're right. I tried this thing. I built a relationship. We talked. I apologized for the thing. And then next time I needed something, they just said yes. You know, he was so surprised at how easy it could be navigate because he never tried it. So that's how you show someone their blind spots. You understand what they want and you show them how, if they see the spot a little bit, it might help them get that thing that they want.
I'm going to use that on my college student.
Perfect.
Awesome. Okay. So Bryan, I feel like we're going to have a lot of people who want to get in touch with you. Can I put your LinkedIn profile in the show notes?
For sure. For sure.
And how else can they learn more about you and your lifetime trusted advisor?
Yeah.
program?
So Lifetime Trusted Advisor is a program where we're teaching people how to transform other people's lives, how to develop people, how to interact with someone such that they become the executive professional they want to be, and it's specifically in a business or executive context. And if you're curious about becoming a epic mentor and coach and learning what it takes to develop the skills that we talked about on this conversation, I invite you just to have a conversation with us, find out more about the program. There's a apply now link I think that Cindy, you can share.
Okay. Yeah, we'll do that.
And if you're not sure you want to do a program or you're not sure that coaching skills is exactly where you want to invest, we have a community, the Lifetime Trusted Advisor community, where you all are welcome. It's free for life. You'll never be charged anything. And you can direct message me there if you have any questions about what we talked about here or you have other questions. It's filled with a bunch of people who are committed to make a difference for other people, coaches, therapists, business leaders, CHROs, and you'd be more than welcome there.
Awesome. Bryan Franklin, thank you so much for spending so much time with us. Really appreciate it. And we'll have to definitely do that follow-up on the different archetypes. So
yeah, the how to influence. Yeah, for sure.
all right, Bryan, thank you so much.
Thank you, Cindy. It was a pleasure.